It was a Tuesday morning in San Francisco, the fog barely lifting off the tops of the sycamores in Golden Gate Park. The usual shuffle of joggers and dog walkers began to appear like clockwork, their routines immune to the soft gray that draped the city like a worn-out sweater. But today was not routine for Doe. At 45, Dorian was the founder and CEO of Hale Dynamics, a venture capital titan whose name was whispered on Forbes lists and across Wall Street desks. His life was governed by precision, measured in mergers, acquisitions, and quarterly forecasts. That morning, however, a last-minute cancellation of a critical meeting with a Taiwanese robotics firm had left an unexpected void in his meticulously managed calendar. Rather than return to the sterile comfort of his minimalist Pacific Heights mansion or bury himself in email triage, Dorian had done something he hadn't done in years. He asked his driver to take him somewhere quiet. "Just drive," he had said, loosening his tie for the first time in a week. "Find somewhere green." 15 minutes later, he found himself walking through the dew-laced paths of Golden Gate Park, his Italian loafers sinking slightly into the soft earth. He moved slowly, hands in his coat pockets, pretending not to feel the awkwardness of being unaccompanied, unshed. It was there, just past the Conservatory of Flowers, that he saw them. At first, he assumed they were part of some early morning daycare outing, perhaps a nanny nearby or a mother out of frame. But as he approached the winding stone path near the duck pond, he saw two girls walking side by side. One was gripping a stroller handle with small, determined hands. The other, perhaps a year younger, was cradling something swaddled in a light blue fleece. It took him a few seconds to register it was a baby. No adults, no urgency, just silence and stillness, and something in their posture, too careful, too deliberate, that made his stomach twist. He slowed to a stop behind a maple tree, watching. They weren't playing. They weren't giggling or whispering like children usually do. They walked with the wary grace of kids who had learned not to draw attention. The girl pushing the stroller had auburn curls that bounced slightly with each step. Maybe 8 years old, maybe younger. Her dress was wrinkled and too thin for the morning chill. The second girl, shorter, but with the same hair color and hazel eyes, walked barefoot. Dorian approached with caution. Every part of him told him this wasn't his business. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a sentimental man. But another voice, quiet but stern, insisted something wasn't right. He crouched a few feet away. "Hi," he said softly, voice lowered. "Are you okay? Are your parents nearby?" The girl holding the baby blinked at him. Her eyes, bright, wide, and tired beyond her years, locked onto his with a strange blend of caution and calm. "Our mom died," she said plainly. "And the man we lived with told us to leave." Dorian blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "He said we couldn't stay. Only the baby could." The words, said without drama, landed like stones dropped in a pond. Ripples of shock, disbelief, and something else, anger, spread through Dorian's chest. "What's your name?" he asked. "I'm Nora," she said. "This is Maeve, and the baby is Eli." Maeve stopped the stroller and gave a small nod, confirming the introductions like a tired diplomat. "And how old are you?" Dorian asked. "I'm 7, Nora said. "Maeve is 6. Eli is 4 months." Dorian exhaled, standing upright slowly, as if rising into a reality he didn't know how to face. "And you've been alone since Saturday," Nora said. "It's Tuesday now, right?" He felt something twist in his stomach. Yes, it was Tuesday. Yes, 2 little girls and a baby had apparently been alone for 3 nights. And no, there was no way he was walking away. The street musician, strumming a soft melody near the park bench, was the only sound accompanying Dorian Hale as he stood still, trying to process what he'd just heard. 7 and 6, he repeated in his head, with a 4-month-old, alone, in a park, in his city. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket, his fingers hesitating over the screen. Should he call someone? The police? Child services? But even as those thoughts flickered, he glanced down again. Maeve had resumed pushing the stroller, her small hands steady. Nora still clutched Eli close to her chest, her lips pressed to the crown of the baby's head, in a motion far too maternal for someone so young. They weren't panicked. They weren't begging. They were surviving. He slid his phone back into his pocket. "I have a car nearby," Dorian said carefully. "It's warm and it's safe. Would you come with me?" Nora looked at Maeve. The two girls exchanged a glance, a silent, practiced conversation that only children from the same storm could share. After a moment, Maeve gave a small nod. Nora looked back up at him. "Okay," she said. The SUV was parked just outside the park gates. His driver, Raoul, blinked in surprise as Dorian approached with two children and a baby. Dorian didn't explain. He didn't owe one yet. He held the door open, letting the girls climb in. Nora handed Eli over, as if she instinctively knew he was too heavy for the car ride. Dorian accepted the bundle carefully, surprised at how natural the weight felt in his arms. Inside the car, the heat wrapped around them like a blanket. The girls settled into the leather seats, their eyes scanning every corner. Dorian watched in the rearview mirror as Nora finally exhaled, her shoulders sagging. Maeve pressed her forehead to the window, staring at the buildings as they drifted past. "Do you know your mom's last name?" he asked gently. "Vera," Nora replied. "Vera Langston." The name struck him like ice down his spine. Langston. He had known a Langston once, a long time ago. "Did your mom ever live in Seattle?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nora blinked. "Yeah, before we moved here. But we only stayed in San Francisco a little while before she..." Dorian turned away, staring out at the road as a wave of memories crashed into him. Jenna Langston. They'd met when he was fresh out of grad school, still living in a studio apartment, still dreaming. She'd had fire in her eyes, the kind that made you reckless. He had loved her like a man without money or power, purely, deeply, and then one day she was gone. No goodbye, no closure, just silence. And now, he looked down at the baby sleeping in his arms, round cheeks, tiny hands curled into fists, eyes fluttering beneath the lids. A child born into loss, a child that might be his. They arrived at Dorian's home 30 minutes later. The sprawling estate overlooked the bay, a symbol of his isolation. It was all glass and steel and silence. The children stepped inside cautiously. Maeve clung to Nora's hand, while Nora held Eli with an instinctual grace that made Dorian's chest ache. He called for Meredith, his house manager. When she appeared, her eyes widened at the sight of the trio. "I need warm food," Dorian said. "Soup, toast, something soft, blankets, the guest rooms, and call my doctor, quietly." Meredith hesitated only for a second before nodding. The girls sat on the large sectional in the living room, their legs dangling over the edge. Eli whimpered. Dorian fetched a warm towel and handed it to Nora. "You can stay here," he said, "for as long as you need. You're safe now." Nora nodded, then whispered something that cut deeper than she could have known. "We didn't think anyone would care." Dorian looked away. He hadn't cared about anything that wasn't measurable in a long time. But now everything had changed. Later that night, after the girls had eaten and Eli had been bathed and swaddled, Dorian sat in his study scrolling through online obituaries. When he typed in Jenna Langston, the page took longer to load than usual, almost as if the internet itself didn't want to show him the truth. There it was. Jenna Langston, 38, passed away suddenly due to cardiac arrest, survived by her 3 children. 3. His throat tightened. There was a photo, her face thinner than he remembered, but her eyes were the same, fierce and soft all at once. No mention of him, not a single word about their past. He closed the laptop slowly. The following morning, he found the girls curled together on the sofa, wrapped in a shared blanket. Eli was tucked into a makeshift crib, fashioned from a basket and some towels. Dorian stood at the doorway, still wearing his tailored suit, but something inside him felt unrecognizable. Not lost, not broken, just real. The next 48 hours passed like a dream trapped inside a courtroom. Dorian Hale, who once negotiated billion-dollar buyouts and casually redirected stock markets, found himself instead navigating the bureaucratic labyrinth of family court. The stakes were higher than any merger, and the opposition wasn't another CEO. It was time, systems, and the shadows of the past. He hadn't planned any of this, but now he couldn't imagine not doing it. In the penthouse conference room of Hale Dynamics, a space once reserved for investor briefings, Dorian now sat with Dr. Celia Vance, a pediatrician he trusted enough to bring to his private home. She wore a warm burgundy coat and carried herself with no-nonsense grace. The children sat quietly on the leather couch as Celia examined them one by one. She took notes, spoke softly, and shot Dorian a knowing glance more than once. "They're underweight," she said after the exams. "Nothing urgent, but signs of long-term nutritional deficiency, probably due to inconsistent meals. Nora has scarring on her back, older, healed, but it's there. Maeve has a mild respiratory infection, possibly untreated, and the baby, Eli, has mild anemia. Again, not critical, but..." Dorian swallowed hard. "But they've been neglected." Celia nodded. He nodded too, slowly. "They're not going back to that." "No," she said. "They're not." That night, as the children napped after their first proper meal in days, Dorian opened a drawer he hadn't touched in a decade. It held one object, a photograph. Jenna and him, arm in arm, standing on a pier in Seattle. She wore a flannel coat and held a paper cup of coffee in both hands. Her eyes sparkled with a dare. His smile was the kind that came only from a simpler time. He closed his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" The DNA test results came back in less than 2 days, fast-tracked by Dorian's legal team with discreet precision. He stared at the page. The conclusion was typed plainly: probability of paternity, 99.98%. Subject: Dorian Hale is the biological father of Nora Langston and Maeve Langston. He ran a hand over his mouth, stunned even though he already knew. No test was needed, but this made it official, irrefutable, legal. He called his attorney at once. "I want custody," he said. "Full custody. Emergency guardianship first, then permanent. And I want a court date." "You'll need to prepare a personal statement," the lawyer said. "They'll want to hear from you, not the executive, the man." Dorian nodded. "They'll hear from a father." On Thursday morning, Dorian dressed differently. No tie, no watch, just a dark sweater, slacks, and the face of a man who had finally stopped trying to impress anyone. He knelt in front of Nora and Maeve as they finished breakfast. "I have to go to court today," he told them, "to ask the judge to let you stay with me." Maeve's lip trembled. "Will they make us leave?" He shook his head. "I won't let them." "You're staying." "I promise." Nora reached over and touched his hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. That simple touch said it all. The courtroom was small, nothing like the grand legal dramas on TV. Just a judge, 2 lawyers, a clerk, and a decision waiting to happen. Dorian stood when called. He cleared his throat, his palms suddenly cold. "Your Honor," he began, "until 5 days ago, I didn't know these girls existed. I didn't know Jenna, our Jenna, had children, had our children. But now that I do, there is nothing in this world more important to me than keeping them safe." He paused, breathing deep. "I've built companies, fortunes, but I never built a family. I thought that part of my life was over. I was wrong. Nora and Maeve are mine. By blood, yes, but more than that. By bond. I will raise them, protect them, love them. And Eli..." He looked down, his voice cracking for the first time. "I don't know if Eli is mine by blood, but I know this. He's theirs, and that makes him mine too." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge sat still for a beat before speaking. "Mr. Hale, we don't often hear statements like that in this courtroom. I appreciate your candor and your heart." An hour later, the papers were signed. Dorian Hale walked out of that building no longer as a CEO, but as a legal guardian, a protector, a father. Back home, Maeve ran to him first, her small arms wrapping around his legs. Nora followed more slowly, her eyes searching his. "Are we staying?" she asked. He knelt down, arms open. "Forever," he whispered, and they fell into him, together. That evening, the penthouse no longer felt like a monument to solitude. It was still filled with clean lines and cool marble, but now it carried something else. Tiny shoes by the front door, a blue baby bottle on the glass coffee table, the faint sound of Nora humming to Eli in the guest room, and Maeve giggling as Meredith helped braid her damp hair. Dorian stood by the kitchen island, fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He stared at the refrigerator door where Nora had taped a crayon drawing. A tall man in a gray sweater, holding hands with two little girls. A baby floated in a sling on his chest. Above the figures, in shaky handwriting, were three words: "Our new dad." The simplicity of it cut deeper than anything in the courtroom ever could. Later, when the children had fallen asleep, Dorian sat at his desk with the box Meredith had found in a delivery from Jenna's old neighbor. She had passed it along days ago, but Dorian hadn't touched it until now. Inside were the pieces of a life lost: a scarf, a chipped coffee mug, a few old photos, a faded birth certificate for Nora, and tucked inside a children's storybook, a folded letter with his name on the front. Dorian. He opened it with shaking hands. "I don't know if this will ever reach you, but if it does, it means I couldn't hold on anymore. I'm sorry I disappeared. I was scared. You were climbing so fast and I was falling apart. I didn't want to burden you. You would have been a good father. I should have given you that chance. If they ever find you, love them the way I always hoped you would love me. Jenna." He folded the letter slowly, his eyes stinging, and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. He didn't cry, but something inside him finally cracked. The next day, Dorian took Nora and Maeve on their first proper outing. Just the three of them and Eli in a carrier strapped across his chest. They didn't go far. A local bookstore, a small park nearby with clean swings and sunshine. They sat at a picnic table eating sandwiches and apple slices. Maeve fed a pigeon by hand. Nora leaned her head on Dorian's arm without a word. No flashbulbs, no assistants, no board members. Just a man with his kids. Back at home, the girls helped him unpack a delivery of secondhand children's books. They were careful with the bindings, flipping through each page like it was treasure. Nora gasped when she found a battered copy of The Secret Garden. "This was Mom's favorite," she said. Dorian smiled faintly. "Mine too. When I was a kid." Maeve looked up. "Did you love her?" He didn't flinch. "Yes, very much." Nora studied him, her expression thoughtful. "She never stopped talking about you." He looked away, throat tightening. That weekend, the penthouse became a home. They spilled pancake batter on the floor. Maeve insisted on blueberries in the shape of stars. Eli spit up on Dorian's shirt, and Nora tried to teach him how to braid hair, badly. The place echoed with footsteps and laughter, and the occasional shriek of a dropped spoon. It wasn't perfect. It was real. One night, as he tucked them in, Nora asked, "Can we call you something else?" "Like what?" he asked, brushing hair from her forehead. Maeve whispered from the other bed, "Not Mr. Hale." Dorian smiled. "What would you like to call me?" There was a long pause. Nora stared at the ceiling. "I don't know yet," she said, "but maybe something that means family." He nodded. "You can call me anything that feels right, whenever you're ready." That night, alone on the balcony with the city glowing beneath him, Dorian read Jenna's letter again. Not with grief this time, but with quiet resolve. He had missed everything. The birth, the first steps, the sleepless nights. But he wouldn't miss what came next. It began with a phone call. Dorian had just returned from dropping the girls off at their first day of school, an elite charter program that made exceptions for late enrollment once they realized who their guardian was. The girls had worn matching backpacks and tightly braided hair, their eyes wide with both fear and excitement. He had barely walked back through the glass doors of his penthouse when Meredith handed him the phone. "It's Child Services," she said quietly. "They want to speak with you." Dorian's heart dropped. The voice on the other end was polite but firm. "We've received a complaint," said the woman. "An anonymous tipster claims that Mr. Hale may not be a suitable guardian due to lack of familial connection to one of the children." Dorian's jaw clenched. "Which one?" "The infant, Eli." "Of course. The paperwork for Nora and Maeve was airtight now. But Eli was different. No DNA test had proven paternity. Jenna had never named a father on his birth certificate. To the law, Eli was still floating. "Are you requesting a welfare check?" Dorian asked coldly. "Not yet," she replied, "but we do require an in-person interview. and potentially temporary relocation of the child until legal clarity is established. His grip tightened around the phone. You'll have that clarity. You're not taking him. That night, Dorian barely slept. He paced the halls like a caged lion. The children didn't know. They laughed over cartoons and devoured grilled cheese. But behind their joy was a ticking clock. At midnight, Dorian emailed his legal team. By 6 a.m., they had filed a petition for temporary custody of Elijah Langston pending adoption review. By noon, a private investigator he had quietly hired sent him a folder. Everything known about Robert Minton, the man Jenna had lived with after leaving Seattle. The same man who told the girls to leave. Robert was not Eli's father, and he had a record. Abandonment, neglect, a sealed juvenile conviction. The next morning, Dorian prepared for battle. He wore a gray suit, not his usual navy or black, something softer, more open. He kissed Nora and Maeve on the head as Meredith walked them to the elevator. "Where are you going?" Maeve asked. "Somewhere important," he said, "to make sure Eli gets to stay with us. Forever." She hugged his leg. Nora said nothing, but her eyes followed him long after the elevator doors had closed. In court, the atmosphere was tense. Dorian's attorney presented the DNA absence, the affidavit from Jenna's neighbor confirming his role as sole caretaker since her death, and, most crucially, Robert Minton's abandonment of the girls. The judge reviewed it all in silence. Then she looked up. "Do you love this child, Mr. Hale?" The question hit like a freight train. "Yes," he said, "as if he were my own, because he is. He's their brother, and I've held him through fever. I've fed him at 2 a.m. I've sung to him off-key and wrapped him in a towel so small it barely fits. I don't know biology, but I know this, he is mine, and I won't let him go." The ruling came 2 days later. Temporary guardianship of Elijah Langston granted to Dorian Hale. Full adoption process approved pending review. That night, the girls didn't know the details, but they sensed it. Dorian scooped Eli into his arms and sat on the rug as Maeve crawled into his lap and Nora leaned against his side. "Are we still a family?" Maeve whispered. He kissed her forehead, stronger than ever. 3 days later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You should have left them in the park. They weren't yours to save. No signature, no handwriting to trace, just venom." Dorian stared at it for a long time, then folded it in half and fed it to the fireplace. The flames devoured it like a memory. That weekend, they took a trip to a cabin by Lake Tahoe. No headlines, no assistance, just pine trees, hot cocoa, and snowball fights that left them breathless and soaked. Maeve named a squirrel Butterscotch. Nora beat Dorian in Go Fish 3 games in a row. Eli took his first laugh. Not smile, laugh. It echoed across the cabin like sunlight and sound. And for the first time in weeks, Dorian didn't feel like he was faking it. He felt like a father. The date crept up on him like a whisper in the dark. April 12th. It wasn't circled on any calendar. It wasn't marked in any school memo or Meredith's planner. But Nora knew, and so did Maeve. That morning, Nora appeared at the breakfast table in a quiet blue dress. Not pink like usual, not her favorite. Just blue, calm, solemn. Maeve sat beside her, unusually still, her spoon swirling in cereal she didn't touch. Dorian poured coffee, hesitated, then sat across from them. "You okay?" he asked. Nora nodded. "It's Mom's birthday today." The room froze. Even Eli, babbling softly in his high chair, seemed quieter. Dorian set his cup down and leaned forward. "Thank you for telling me," he said gently. "Would you like to do something for her?" Nora blinked. Maeve looked up, wide-eyed. "I thought you'd say we shouldn't talk about her," Nora whispered. Dorian's voice cracked. "She gave me the 2 bravest girls in the world. We'll always talk about her." They spent the morning in the small sunroom at the edge of the penthouse. Maeve cut colored paper into shaky hearts. Nora wrote a letter with a purple marker and folded it carefully. Dorian helped them tape the notes to helium balloons and walked with them to the rooftop garden. They stood beneath the open sky. Nora held one balloon, Maeve the other. "Happy birthday, Mom," Nora said. "We're okay." They let go. The balloons rose quickly, climbing past the skyline. spinning toward the clouds. Dorian wrapped his arms around their shoulders as they watched in silence. Later that evening, Dorian found Nora alone in the reading nook. She had the secret garden in her lap but wasn't turning the pages. "She never got a birthday cake," she said. "What flavor did she like?" Dorian asked. "Strawberry with whipped cream." He stood up. "Put your shoes on." "Why?" "Because even if it's late, we're going to fix that." At 7:45 p.m., they walked into a quiet neighborhood bakery that was 10 minutes from closing. Dorian explained the situation softly to the woman behind the counter. 5 minutes later, she returned with a cake, small, heart-shaped, pale pink, and delicate. "On the house," she said. "Tell your mom we said happy birthday." Nora's eyes shone with tears. "She would have loved this," she whispered. Back at the penthouse, they lit a single candle. Not for a wish, just to remember. Maeve sang half a verse of Happy Birthday before her voice broke and she crawled into Dorian's lap. They ate the cake together in silence. Crumbs and frosting smudged the edges of the counter. And Dorian knew, this moment, this mess, it mattered. Later that week, a letter arrived at his office. This one was signed, from Robert Minton. It was short. "You think you've won. You think you can erase me. But blood's thicker than money, Dorian, and I'm not done yet." Dorian stared at the paper, then folded it and placed it in a sealed envelope marked, "Legal, pending." He wasn't afraid, he was angry. 2 days later, a summons arrived. Robert had filed for paternal rights to Eli. No DNA, no proof, just a claim. And that was enough for the court to require a hearing. Meredith found Dorian on the balcony that night. "You okay?" she asked. He didn't look at her, just stared at the stars over the Bay Bridge. "I swore I wouldn't let them get hurt again," he said. "They won't," she replied. "They already were. You gave them more in 3 months than he did in 3 years." He turned finally. "But what if that doesn't matter to the court?" She placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Then you fight harder." That weekend, Dorian cleared his schedule. Every meeting, every investor call, every event. He spent the days learning how to braid tighter, how to read bedtime stories with voices, how to make grilled cheese without burning it. He sat with Maeve during her science homework. He practiced piano chords with Nora. He rocked Eli to sleep, whispering nonsense lullabies. And every night he wrote. Pages of notes, pages of memories, pages of proof. Because if the court wanted a story, he'd give them one they couldn't ignore. The courtroom was colder than it should have been. Not the temperature, but the atmosphere. Clinical, bureaucratic. Dorian sat beside his attorney, a wall of legal documents in front of them. On the other side sat Robert Minton, thinner than the pictures, greasier hair, hollow eyes. He wore a button-down shirt that still smelled like smoke and resentment. Robert didn't look at Dorian, but Dorian didn't look away. The judge, a stern woman with gray streaks in her bun and weary kindness in her voice, addressed the room. This hearing is to determine whether Mr. Minton has a legal claim to the child known as Elijah Langston. Dorian's attorney rose first, presenting the facts. Jenna had never listed Robert on Eli's birth certificate. No acknowledgement of paternity was ever filed. Robert had, by his own admission, left the children unsupervised in a park. And finally, he had never sought custody until now. Then Robert took the stand. His voice was rough, defensive. "She was my partner," he said. "We lived together. I raised that baby for months. I bought diapers, bottles. Just because I didn't sign a paper doesn't mean I wasn't his dad." Dorian sat still, fingers interlocked. The judge nodded slowly. "Mr. Hale," she said, "would you like to speak?" He stood. "My name is Dorian Hale," he said, voice steady. "I didn't know Jenna had children until I found Nora, Maeve, and Eli alone in Golden Gate Park. No adults, no one protecting them. That was 4 months ago. Since then, they've lived in my home. I've cared for them. I've fed Eli at midnight. I've taken him to the pediatrician. I've held him during his first fever. I've sung to him badly and rocked him until he fell asleep." He paused, eyes burning. "I don't care about biology. I care about presence. Robert left them in a park. I found them. I chose them. And every day since, I keep choosing them." The courtroom was silent. Even Robert stared at the floor. The judge folded her hands. "I've heard enough." Everyone held their breath. 3 days later, the ruling came by mail. Dorian opened the envelope slowly. Full legal guardianship of Elijah Langston awarded to Dorian Hale. Adoption process officially authorized. He exhaled. For the first time in weeks, his lungs fully expanding. That night, the family had spaghetti in the living room. Eli sat in his high chair, flinging noodles with glee. Nora laughed. Maeve wiped tomato sauce from her cheek. Dorian watched them all with a kind of awe. It had taken courtrooms and lawyers, and tears and letters and sleepless nights. But now, Eli was home, and no one could take him away again. A week later, something unexpected happened. Harper finally spoke the word. It was bedtime. Dorian had just finished reading Goodnight Moon. The lights were dimmed. Eli was already asleep. As he leaned over to tuck in Maeve, Nora whispered from the other bed, "Can we call you Dad now?" He looked at her, stunned. Her eyes glistened. "If you want," he said, voice low. She nodded. "Okay, Dad," Maeve echoed softly. "Night, Dad." He kissed their foreheads, then walked out of the room and stood silently in the hallway, his heart pounding so hard it felt like the world had shifted again. Later that night, as he closed up his laptop in the study, he noticed something new on the fridge. A drawing. 4 stick figures, Nora, Maeve, Eli in a sling, and a man in a gray sweater. Underneath it, "Our family, forever." Autumn melted into winter without a fight. For the first time in years, Dorian Hale didn't dread the holidays. He didn't fill the weeks with business trips or investor summits. He didn't disappear into conference calls or hide behind strategy memos. He was too busy buying snow boots, too busy burning pancakes, too busy learning how to wrap presents that didn't look like corporate gifts. He was too busy being Dad. By mid-December, the penthouse had transformed. A tiny artificial Christmas tree blinked in the corner, clumsily decorated by 4 small hands. Ornaments dangled at awkward heights, bunched in places that made Dorian laugh every time he passed them. Stockings were hung with duct tape, and the baby's first photo with Santa had been framed and placed next to Jenna's picture on the bookshelf. The house echoed with new kinds of noise, footsteps, laughter, questions shouted from the hallway, giggles behind closed doors. It wasn't chaos, it was life. One cold afternoon, the adoption papers for Eli arrived via courier. Dorian signed them in the sunroom while Maeve sat on the rug reading aloud, and Nora braided yarn into bookmarks. When he finished signing the last page, he placed his pen down with care. Then he pulled Eli into his arms and whispered, "You're mine, buddy. For real. For always." The baby cooed and drooled on his sleeve. It was perfect. On Christmas Eve, Dorian stood in the doorway of the girls' room and watched them sleep, curled against each other like mirror images. Down the hall, Eli snored lightly in his crib, one hand curled around the ear of a plush fox. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't need to. He just stood there, listening to their breathing, letting peace settle into his bones. The next morning, the penthouse exploded with wrapping paper and squeals. Nora got a science kit. Maeve got a journal with a lock. Eli got a mountain of chewable toys and promptly tried to eat a bow. In the middle of the chaos, Nora handed Dorian a small box. Inside was a keychain made from plastic beads with 4 names spelled out crookedly: Dad, Nora, Maeve, Eli. He blinked hard. "I love it." "We wanted to get you a real gift," Maeve said, "but Meredith said this was better." "She was right," Dorian whispered. That night, as the children fell asleep beneath the glow of string lights and stuffed animals, Dorian sat by the window with a glass of water and a heart that felt like it was finally full. He picked up the framed photo of Jenna and looked at her smile. Not with sorrow this time, but with gratitude. "You gave me everything I didn't know I needed," he whispered. Spring arrived late, but not unwelcome. By then, the apartment had learned to breathe with the rhythm of family. Dance parties in socks on Sunday mornings, tooth fairy notes, sippy cups left on his desk, tiny handprints on his mirror. Dorian no longer measured time in contracts and closings. He measured it in bedtime stories, scraped knees and tiny voices calling, "Dad, come see." And one quiet evening, with the windows open and the city humming outside, Maeve crawled into his lap with a question. Do you think Mom sees us? He paused, then nodded. Every single day. Maeve smiled, curled against his chest, and fell asleep. Epilogue. Years from now, people would still talk about Dorian Hale. Some would remember the tech empire he built. Some would remember his legendary business instincts. But those who truly knew him would speak of something else. They'd talk about the man who once found two little girls and a baby in a park and walked away from everything he thought he was supposed to be because he heard something louder than ambition, the quiet call of a second chance. And this time, he didn't miss it. 1. The Pau Dorian didn't have to stop in the park. He had no obligation to those 3 children, but he chose to stow life of 2. Family as Eli wasn't Dorian's biological son, but love, care, and protection of a family 3. Fatherhood isn't a title, it's a commitment. Dorian was once a powerful, isolated man. He didn't know how to be a father, but he learned. 1 bottle, 1 fever, 1 bedtime story at a time. He became a father not because he had to, but because he showed a. Lesson you don PR, etent, and kami. 4th. Redemption isn't Dorian couldn't change the fact that he had missed Jenna's life, missed the early years of his daughters. But he didn't let that guilt paralyze him. He moved forward, fiercely protecting the children. Not out of guilt, but out of purpose. Lesson, we can't rewrite the past, but we can choose who we become today. And we can protect what truly matters, with love, not regret. 5. Love doesn't need grand gestures to be real. There was no dramatic rescue, no miracle, just quiet, repeated actions. Midnight feedings, hair braiding attempts, trips to school. And through those small acts, healing happened. Lesson, real love is built in the everyday moments, in patience, in showing up, in choosing not to give up, even when no one is watching. Overall message, we are not D. This still love every. And sometimes in a world too fast and too loud, all it takes is to pause. Ilwag.